1888. The wind had a way of speaking in Copper Creek, dry and low, like a tired preacher who'd long lost faith in his own words. Dust swirled through the empty streets, curling around the legs of horses tethered outside the saloon, whispering through the cracked churchyard fence. Beneath that same wind, Elias Boone stood with his hat in hand before a modest grave of sun-bleached stone and weathered script. Her name was almost gone from the carving, but he didn't need to read it. He carried every letter of it behind his ribs. 3 years. That's how long it had been since the poker night turned into a gunshot, since the fire in the saloon burned his home to ash, and his wife's laughter to memory. Boone had buried his badge the same day he buried her. He'd told himself justice was done best by men with clear eyes, and his had been clouded with grief ever since. He knelt, brushing dust from the grave marker, tracing the faint engraving with a calloused finger. The desert sun leaned heavy on his shoulders. His gray coat hung like weight itself, frayed from miles of lonely travel. A few wilted flowers lay by the stone. He didn't know who'd placed them. Maybe a kind stranger, maybe no one at all. Boone replaced them with a single fresh daisy he'd bought from a traveling girl near the rail line that morning. "Hey, darlin'," he murmured, voice rasped thin as wind through sage. "I made it back." Silence answered him, soft and final. A hawk wheeled high above, its cry cutting through the stillness like a memory refusing to fade. He stood after a while, slipping the hat back onto his head. His boots sank slightly into the dry earth as he turned toward the town, a place that looked as if it were holding its breath between life and death. Copper Creek wasn't much anymore. One main street, 2 watering holes, a general store, and a sheriff who'd given up trying to outdraw his own shadow. But to Boone, it was the last place that still held her ghost. He walked slow, every step kicking up the scent of dust and old sorrow. Townsfolk glanced at him as he passed, an old drifter with a quiet face and eyes like weathered glass. Whispers trailed behind him. Someone said he used to wear a badge out of Abilene. Another muttered he'd once shot a man in Dodge for spitting on a lady's grave. Nobody asked questions. The kind of calm that clung to Elias Boone made people uneasy. The saloon doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, the dim light carried the smell of whiskey, tobacco, and long-lost chances. The piano in the corner played slow, like it knew it was losing. A few miners hunched over their drinks. Laughter came from a back table, low, mean, and sharp-edged. Boone's eyes adjusted, drifting toward the source of that sound. For men sat there, cards in hand, smoke curling around their faces. One wore a brown vest, a crooked grin, and a scar that carved through his cheek like a lightning bolt frozen in skin. Boone's breath caught, not from surprise but from something older, something that had waited 3 years to exhale. He didn't need to count their number, didn't need to study their guns or boots. He'd seen them before, through firelight, through the smoke of a burning saloon, as they rode off with blood on their hands. The one with the scar had looked back that night, and Boone had sworn, even through the smoke, that he'd remember that face until the desert swallowed him whole. Now here they were. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor cruel enough to bring them back together over a deck of cards. He walked to the counter. "Whiskey," he said quietly. The bartender, a woman with a braid of silver-streaked hair and tired eyes, nodded. "You new in town?" "Just passing through." "You don't look like the passing kind." He didn't answer. The glass hit the counter with a dull thud. The whiskey burned clean, cutting through the dryness in his throat. He turned the empty glass slowly between his fingers, watching the men at the table in the reflection of the back mirror. They hadn't recognized him. Why would they? Time and grief had carved him into a stranger. His hair was shot through with gray, his beard rough and uneven. The calm in his face wasn't peace. It was restraint, a silence learned from carrying pain too long. The piano player shifted to a livelier tune. Boone reached into his coat pocket and felt the cold weight of a silver ring pressing against his palm. He pulled it out, turning it between thumb and forefinger. The metal caught the lamplight, the small engraving of 2 initials still visible, E and M. He remembered her laugh, soft and quick. How she'd hated poker nights, always saying the game made men forget what they owed. He'd quit playing for her once. But that night, 3 years ago, he'd been on duty, chasing thieves through the desert. He hadn't been there to stop the men who came instead. Boone placed the ring back on his finger and pushed the empty glass away. The saloon had grown quieter. Even laughter from the back tables sounded forced now. Tired of pretending it belonged to Joy, Boone rose and walked over, his boots whispering over the wooden floorboards. The men looked up as his shadow stretched across the table. "Evening, gents," he said. The one with the scar grinned, not recognizing the weight behind that greeting. "You looking to lose some money, old-timer?" Boone's lips curved into something that might have been mistaken for a smile. "Money ain't what I came to lose." The men laughed, the sound brittle as glass. One shoved a chair back with his boot. "Plenty of room at the table," he said. "Buyin's $1." Boone slid a coin across the table and sat down. The chair creaked under him. He set his hat beside the cards, laid his revolver gently on the table beside it, as if to remind the world he hadn't forgotten how. The bartender looked their way, uneasy. The piano faltered mid-note. "Name's Maddox," the scarred man said, dealing with a lazy flick of his wrist. "You." Boone met his eyes. "Elias. Mighty fine name for a man who looks half dead." "Dead men play better," Boone said. That earned another round of laughter, though none of them quite met his gaze again. The cards slid across the table, whispering secrets in the flicker of lamplight. Boone picked his up, the corners rough against his fingertips. A pair of queens. He didn't look at them twice. He could feel the rhythm of the room, the slow pulse of danger, the thrum of unspoken memories pressing at his ribs. He played this game before, not just with cards but with men, each bluff and raise a measure of will. Maddox leaned forward, smirking. "You any good at this, Elias?" Boone's voice stayed even. "Used to be. Then I lost something that mattered more than money." That made Maddox pause. "That so?" Boone nodded. "Yeah, but luck has a way of coming back round." The other men chuckled nervously. The dealer called for bets. Coins clinked. Boone tossed one in, eyes never leaving Maddox's scar. Through the haze of smoke and lamplight, time folded. He was back there again. The smell of kerosene, the crack of a gun, her scream cut short. The way he'd ridden back into town too late, the saloon burning, her ring left in the dirt outside. He took another card, the motion steady, almost reverent. Maddox's laugh grated against the silence. "Hell, Elias, you play like a man with nothing to lose." Boone lifted his gaze, eyes like dusk over desert stone. "You're not wrong." The cards whispered across the table like secrets no one wanted to speak aloud. The lamplight above them swayed in the draft, casting slow-moving shadows that slipped over faces lined by dust, whiskey, and sin. Clay Maddox leaned back in his chair, one boot hooked over the rung, grinning that half-crooked grin that men learned only after killing something worth remembering. "Well now," he said, voice dragging through his throat like gravel, "ain't every day we get a gray ghost sitting at our table. You sure your eyes can still see the suits, old-timer?" Elias Boone didn't look up. He turned his cards slow, fingers deliberate, steady as the tick of the wall clock. "Old eyes see different, Maddox," he murmured. "Sometimes clearer." The table chuckled, though not all at once. There was something about Boone's tone, quiet, sure, that made laughter come out thin. The piano had stopped playing somewhere behind them. Even the bartender's hands had stilled. Boone tossed a coin into the pot. "Let's make it interesting." Maddox's grin widened. "You got no idea how interesting things can get, friend." He dealt the next round with a flick of his wrist, cards slicing the smoky air. The men watched Boone's every move. He didn't fidget, didn't blink much, just studied his cards like a preacher reading his last verse before judgment. He won the first hand. Barely smiled. He won the second. Still didn't smile. By the third, the table had gone quieter. Maddox's smirk started to strain, like a man trying too hard to pretend something wasn't wrong. Boone's eyes stayed fixed on the cards, but somewhere behind them, something else moved, a storm long held back. Each card he turned over seemed to carry weight heavier than luck. The Queen of Hearts. His wife's favorite card. She used to tease him about it, saying no man with calloused hands should have such fondness for queens. He'd laugh, promise to win her something with it one day. That laugh came back now, faint and ghost-like, curling through his memory like smoke from a long-dead fire. Maddox leaned in, breaking the silence. "You sure you know what you're doing, old man? I seen that look before. Same one in a mirror when the whiskey hits too hard." Boone's gaze lifted, slow and steady. "I know the look of a man seeing something he regrets." The words landed like stones in still water. The other players shifted uneasily. One spat tobacco into a bucket. Another reached for his drink, hands shaking just enough to clink glass against wood. Boone slid another coin forward. "Call." Maddox's grin returned, brittle as old paint. "You got some fire left in you. I'll give you that." Boone's mouth twitched at the corner. "Fire don't die easy. Depends who lit it." The cards turned again. The game rolled on, quiet but alive. The tension coiled tighter with every deal. Each shuffle scraped against Boone's memory. The sound of paper meeting paper became the sound of gunfire, the snap of a hammer, the cry that tore through his world 3 years ago. He saw it again, unbidden. The saloon back then, not this one, but another not so different, filled with laughter, with light. His wife standing near the bar, her hands folded, smiling at him over the crowd. The air thick with tobacco, whiskey, the tune of a fiddle. Then the door had burst open. Shadows entered with guns drawn and masks on. He could still hear the shout, hers, his. He couldn't tell which. One of the men had grabbed the money, another struck the barkeep, and then came the shot. Quick, sharp, final. Boone blinked hard, grounding himself in the present. The cards before him blurred for a heartbeat, then came back into focus. Across from him, Maddox laughed low. "What's wrong, old-timer? Spirits talking to you?" Boone tilted his head. "Maybe. You ever hear him?" "Only the ones I put under." The line was meant to scare, but it only confirmed what Boone already knew. His pulse didn't rise. He leaned forward just slightly, the lamplight glinting off the ring on his finger. Maddox's eyes flicked toward it for half a second, just long enough. Boone saw the twitch in his jaw. Recognition, buried under bravado. The next hand came. Boone's fingers brushed the edges of the cards, as if reading them by touch alone. King. 10. Queen again. His chest tightened. Every queen felt like her voice, soft and echoing. "Eli, don't stay out late. Eli, promise me you'll come home safe." He'd promised, and he'd failed. Maddox threw down his cards. Full house. King's high. Boone glanced down. "Beats me." He folded. His tone was even, though inside him, a tide shifted. Losing one hand didn't matter. The game wasn't for money. It was for truth, and truth always took its time. The night stretched on. Cigarette smoke thickened the air. The lamplight burned low, golden and dim. Boone won small, lost big. Kept the rhythm of a man who knew that patience could kill quicker than a bullet. Maddox kept talking, spinning tales about range wars and women, about luck and death, and how God never sat in on poker. But Boone heard something else under the words, a certain rasp, the drag of breath from a wound that hadn't healed right. And then, when Maddox leaned to pick up a dropped card, Boone saw it clear under the collar of his vest. A scar, pale and puckered, running from collarbone to shoulder. He remembered that scar. He remembered the night the saloon burned, the flash of his gun, the chaos. He'd hit one of the bastards before they escaped through the flames. Thought he'd died in the fire. But here he was, laughing, breathing, dealing cards like nothing ever happened. The room tilted slightly in Boone's vision, though he didn't move. The piano started again, a lazy tune that faltered as if the players' hands had grown unsure. The men kept betting, but Boone barely heard the clink of coins anymore. In his head, he heard her again, her laugh, so bright it hurt to remember. He saw her dancing barefoot on their porch, the hem of her dress catching sunlight. He heard her hum as she made coffee, the way she'd reach for him when thunder rolled across the plains. He'd give anything to hear that sound again, to touch her hand one more time. But life had taken her, and now life had brought him the man who'd done it. Boone's hand didn't tremble as he picked up the next card. His heart was steady calm, the kind of calm that comes only when a man stands at the edge of something he's been walking toward his whole life. Maddox laughed again, though it came out harsh this time. "You play quiet, Elias. You sure you're not sleeping through your luck? Boone's eyes lifted slowly. Luck's awake. Just patient. Maddox smirked. You talk like a preacher. No, Boone said. Preachers talk about forgiveness. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. Maddox's grin faltered. His fingers drummed against the table, fast and uneven. The other men looked anywhere but at Boone. Another hand came. Boone dealt this time, smooth and unhurried. The cards snapped clean in the quiet. Each one fell like a heartbeat. The pot grew, coin by coin, until the table gleamed with the shimmer of whiskey light and desperation. Maddox raised him double. Boone matched it without a word. Outside, thunder rumbled closer, crawling across the sky. The piano stopped again. The bartender wiped a glass but didn't drink from it. The saloon's walls seemed to hold their breath. Boone studied the cards in his hand. 2 queens, a jack, a 10, an ace. A near straight. He could win if he wanted to. But winning wasn't what he'd come for. The rain began as a whisper, small, uncertain drops, tapping against the warped windows of the Copper Creek Saloon. A storm was crawling across the desert, its thunder distant but certain, like the echo of a gunshot long past. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on. The smell of whiskey, sweat, and tension hung like smoke that refused to clear. Elias Boone sat at the poker table, his hat tilted low, the brim shadowing eyes that had stopped blinking. He'd gone quiet again, quieter than before. Clay Maddox noticed. Men like Maddox always did when quiet started to feel like danger. You got a strange way about you, old man, Maddox said. His tone meant to sound easy, but there was something tight beneath it. Ain't met many folks who can stare death in the eye and smile at her. Boone didn't answer. He stacked his cards face down, deliberate, the faint click of cardboard against wood marking time. The other men chuckled, but it wasn't laughter. It was the kind that comes when men don't know what else to do with their fear. The storm outside grumbled. Lightning lit the room for half a heartbeat, painting every face in ghost-white light. Maddox's scar gleamed like a blade. Boone's gaze flicked toward it and back down again, calm as a man reading scripture. Call, Boone said softly, sliding 2 coins into the pot. Maddox's jaw flexed. You're either the dumbest son of a gun in the territory, or the luckiest. Maybe both. Boone smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. The cards were turned. Boone lost. He didn't flinch. Maddox's men hooped and slammed their palms on the table. Well, look at that. Old man's luck's gone dry. Boone chuckled once low, quiet, real. Luck's like rain, he said. You can't keep it forever, but it always comes back around. The piano in the corner tried to pick up a tune again, something jaunty, but the sound faltered halfway. The player stopped altogether, sensing the shift in the air that words hadn't yet caught up to. Boone let himself lose another hand, then another. He played like a man drifting, as though the game had ceased to matter. But every loss was a move, every coin a whisper in a larger plan. His face stayed unreadable, his eyes steady and dry as old timber. Maddox leaned forward now, elbows on the table, grin wide again. Guess the desert took your edge, huh? Maybe you used to be someone. Maybe not. Boone turned the ring on his finger once, a small, unconscious movement. Maybe. The dealer cleared the cards, his hands trembling just enough to scatter one on the floor. Boone bent to pick it up, the Queen of Hearts. He turned it between his fingers, thumb brushing over the painted face. You ever hear the story of a widow who wouldn't rest? Boone asked, almost absently. Maddox laughed. What's this, a bedtime tale? Boone's tone didn't change. She lived up north, near the rail line. Husband got himself killed in a poker game gone wrong. Same kind of place as this. The men went still, caught somewhere between curiosity and unease. Boone's voice had weight, not loud, but heavy, as though it dragged something real behind it. She used to walk the roads at night. Boone went on. Never said a word. Folks said she was looking for the man who killed her husband. Sometimes they'd find her footprints in the dust outside a saloon, sometimes by the graveyard. Always fresh. Never stopped. Lightning flared again, bright and sudden, washing the room in white. Boone's face didn't move. The thunder followed a few seconds later, shaking the glasses on the shelf. What happened to her? One of the outlaws asked, his voice a little too small. Boone's eyes lifted from his cards. Depends on who you ask. Some say she found the man. Some say she didn't need to. Some say the man never slept right again, even when he was alone. No one spoke after that. The only sound was the storm growing closer, pressing against the walls. Maddox's grin had faded a fraction. His eyes darted to the window, then back to Boone. You trying to spook us, old man? Boone smiled faintly. You spook easy. The gang laughed, but the sound came late, forced. The game resumed, though none of them played quite as loose anymore. Boone lost 2 more hands, his pile of coins shrinking, his movements slow and steady as a pendulum. Then he raised the next pot. Not much, just enough to sting. Maddox smirked again. Still got a little fight left in you, huh? Boone's tone stayed soft. Fight's all some men got left. The cards came down. Boone's hand was worthless. He lost clean again. Maddox barked a laugh. You ain't got a prayer, Elias. You play like you're waiting for a ghost to deal for you. Boone met his eyes, and for the first time that night, something moved behind his calm. A flicker of sorrow, or anger, or both. Maybe I am. Outside, the rain came harder. It hammered the roof in steady rhythm, drumming like 1,000 boots on the march. The lantern above them flickered, its flame shrinking against the wind that pushed through the cracks. Boone reached into his coat pocket. The table watched him with cautious eyes. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might be reaching for a gun. But what he set down wasn't steel. It was silver. A small, polished ring, his wife's ring. It caught the lamplight and threw it back in gold. A quiet thing, beautiful, untouched by time. This hand, Boone said softly, I'll raise with something better than coin. The words settled in the room, like dust after a storm. Every man there knew something had shifted, though none could name what. The piano player had stopped pretending to play. Even the bartender froze mid-polish, rag limp in her hand. Maddox stared at the ring, then at Boone. That's a hell of a trinket, old man. It's worth more than money. I'll bet it ain't worth what you owe. Boone smiled. That's where you're wrong. Maddox leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Where'd you get it? Boone's fingers brushed the edge of the ring. It was a gift. From a woman I loved. The words came low, almost tender, but under them lay a blade's edge. Maddox laughed, short and sharp. Hell, I've had a few gifts from women myself. Not like this one, Boone said. Maddox reached for his whiskey. The glass trembled faintly in his hand, and he hated himself for it. You sure you want to bet that? Looks like it means something. Boone's eyes never wavered. It does. The storm cracked open above them, thunder rolling like a cannon shot. The lamp flickered again, shadows crawling up the walls. Boone sat still, his hand resting near the ring, his other near the revolver lying easy beside him. Maddox grinned wide, but his jaw was tight. You know, Elias, I could swear I seen a ring like that before. Boone didn't blink. You did. Maddox's smirk faltered. That's so. Boone nodded once, slow and final. You took it off her hand before the fire. The words dropped like stones. The room seemed to collapse into silence. Every man froze. The rain stopped mattering, the thunder too. The air itself grew still, thick with the weight of what had just been said. Maddox's hand hovered near his holster. His men shifted, eyes darting from Boone to their leader. Boone didn't move an inch. His face was calm, the kind of calm that frightened men more than fury ever could. Maddox tried to speak, but his throat caught. You. Boone's eyes cut through him, cold and steady. You remember her, don't you? She laughed when you came through the door. Said you didn't need to rob folks playing cards for pennies. You shot her anyway. The saloon was so quiet it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. The only sounds left were the soft tick of the clock above the bar and the slow drip from a leaky patch in the ceiling. Each drop hit the floorboards like a countdown. Elias Boone sat still as stone. His revolver lay beside his cards, close enough to touch but far enough to look harmless. Clay Maddox's eyes flicked toward it once, then back to Boone's face. Neither man smiled anymore. The room had become a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. Rain hissed against the windows. Outside, lightning tore the sky open again, flashing pale blue light across the tables and the whiskey bottles lined up like soldiers on the shelves. Inside, the storm found its echo in the hearts of the men who hadn't yet drawn breath, waiting for the first move to come. Boone didn't blink. His gaze held steady on Maddox, calm as a man who'd already walked through hell and come back just to settle an old debt. Maddox tried to smirk, but his lips barely twitched. "You got a big mouth for a dead man, Elias." Boone's voice came low, smooth as smoke. "Funny. I was thinking the same of you." One of Maddox's men shifted near the bar, hand inching toward his holster. Boone didn't even glance at him, but the motion froze all the same. The quiet had weight now, pressing down on every chest, making air itself a burden. 3 years, Boone said softly. "You remember that night? The saloon up in Dust Creek. You came for money. She didn't have any. You shot her anyway." Maddox's jaw clenched. "She shouldn't have got in the way." Boone's eyes darkened, not rage, just something deeper, colder. "She wasn't in the way. You were." The words landed hard. For a moment, even the storm outside seemed to hush. Maddox's fingers twitched near his belt. "You think you're here for justice? Ain't no justice left in this land. Just men like us and the dirt we leave behind." "Maybe," Boone said, "but sometimes the dirt remembers." The clock ticked again. Drip, drip. The floor creaked as someone shifted nervously. One of the outlaws muttered a curse under his breath. Boone's hand stayed loose, relaxed. Maddox's was tight, tendons standing out like wire beneath his skin. The silence stretched, long enough for the whiskey smell to turn bitter in the back of everyone's throats. Then Maddox laughed once, a dry, empty sound. "You ain't gonna do it. You've been sitting here talking, like a preacher, but you ain't got the guts." Boone didn't answer. He didn't need to. Maddox's eyes flicked again toward the ring gleaming on the table. That little piece of silver seemed to mock him, a circle that couldn't be broken, a promise he'd tried and failed to destroy. His own hand began to tremble. "You don't scare me," he said, but his voice cracked halfway through. Boone finally spoke, his tone barely above a whisper. "You should." The thunder outside cracked like gunfire, shaking the room to its ribs. Maddox's hand went for his gun. The world slowed. Boone didn't think. His body moved on its own, guided by memory and purpose. Maddox's revolver cleared leather, but Boone's was already rising, smooth, swift, inevitable. The hammer snapped back. One shot. The sound split the room like the sky itself had opened. Maddox's head jerked back. His chair slammed into the wall as he fell, a red bloom spreading across his chest. The lamp overhead swung wild from the concussion, sending shadows spinning across the ceiling like ghosts trying to escape. For a breathless second, no one moved. Then chaos came roaring in. One of Maddox's men yelled and drew. Boone turned, fired once, clean, precise, final. The man fell before he could squeeze his trigger. Another dove for the door, crashing into a table and scattering cards and coins like ashes in the wind. Boone didn't follow him. He wasn't there for the ones who ran. The last outlaw raised his rifle with shaking hands, but his eyes were wide with something beyond fear. "Don't," Boone said quietly. The man froze, then dropped the weapon. It hit the floor with a hollow thud, and the sound of it seemed to echo forever. The smell of gunpowder filled the room, sharp and metallic. The rain outside turned furious, slamming against the windows as if the storm itself wanted to wash away what had just happened. Boone stood slowly, his revolver still smoking in his hand. He looked down at Maddox's body. The man's eyes were open, fixed on nothing, his mouth frozen in half a word he'd never finish. Boone bent and picked up the ring from the table. He brushed a thumb over its surface, wiping away the blood that had splattered across it. For a moment, the world narrowed to just that, his hand, the ring, and the faint reflection of the lamplight gleaming in its curve. He slipped it into his pocket. "You can rest now," he whispered, though whether he spoke to his wife or himself, no one could tell. Behind him, one of the survivors stammered, "Why, you killed her." Boone holstered his gun. "Only the ones who tried to kill me." The man nodded, swallowing hard, backing away toward the door. He didn't look back when he fled into the rain. The saloon was nearly empty now. Bottles lay shattered on the floor, whiskey bleeding into the cracks between boards. A deck of cards had spilled near Maddox's hand, queens, kings, aces, all ruined by dust and blood. The piano player sat frozen, hands hovering above the keys, afraid to even breathe. The clock above the bar kept ticking. The drip from the roof had stopped. Boone walked to the counter, poured himself a glass of whiskey with steady hands, and drank it down. The burn was clean, searing the cold from his chest. He set the glass down gently, as if the act itself demanded respect. The doors slammed open. Sheriff Tom Granger burst in, coat dripping rain, revolver half-drawn. He stopped cold when he saw the scene. The smoke, the bodies, the silence. What in God's name happened here? Boone didn't turn. Justice. The sheriff's eyes moved from Boone to Maddox and back again. You do this. Boone nodded once. They started it 3 years ago. I just finished the hand. Granger lowered his gun. You know I can't let you walk away from this clean. Boone finally turned to face him, eyes tired but clear. You can't if you understand it. The sheriff sighed, looking at the bodies again. I understand more than I care to admit. Boone gave a small nod. Then we're done here. He stepped past the sheriff, boots echoing slow on the wooden floor. When he reached the door, he paused and looked back once more at the table. The ring's imprint was still visible where it had sat, an empty circle on the wood. The game's done, Boone said softly. House wins. He pushed through the doors and stepped out into the rain. The storm swallowed him. The downpour drenched the dust from his coat, streaked his hat, and hissed against the barrel of his gun. Lightning flared again, outlining him against the vast, open street, alone, unhurried, free in a way that had nothing to do with law or mercy. Behind him, the saloon lights dimmed. The sheriff stood over Maddox's body, hat in hand, saying nothing. Somewhere in the distance, the thunder rolled again, a low rumble that sounded almost like a sigh. Boone walked toward the edge of town, where the land stretched flat and endless, a place big enough to bury a lifetime of ghosts. His boots sank into the mud, and the rain washed blood from his hands until only the smell of powder remained. He didn't look back. Justice was never clean, but sometimes it was enough.